This is the
Five Stars
podcast.
Let me talk to you.
Hi.
So, what do you guys want to talk about? Tell me we're not telling lies.
Thanks, guys. Back to you.
I almost held this off until early Sunday morning. Almost. I just don't know if I'm physically capable of forcing myself to wake up before 6 a.m. tomorrow. It's weird because the days are technically getting longer now that summer's approaching, but I'm finding it progressively more difficult to wake myself up. By that, I don't mean physically getting out of bed. I just mean turning my brain on. I've tried the cold shower thing before. I know there are a lot of added health benefits to doing stuff like that. I personally don't like the idea of trying to do something like that as soon as I wake up. I'd be more on board with doing one of those cold plunges. But in that sense, I would only really want to do it if I had some kind of workout planned. There's all this stuff that I've read about with the proper way to train and diet and all that stuff. I know for me, there are definitely things that I could do to improve my workout regimen. I'm just so skeptical about all the stuff that I read out there on the internet. Like, train this way, diet this way, take these supplements, sleep this many hours, work out at these specific times during the day, take these pre-workout protein powders. Just way too much information to process. And it's so obvious that there's no one clear-cut formula that works. There's this formula works for my body type, or this works for my particular training style. I think I have kind of settled into a pattern of making sure that I train 4 or 5 days a week, work the different muscle groups sporadically throughout the week, eat meals that are healthier and less processed, drink more water, basic stuff like that. I'm not doing all the TRT stuff, although I haven't ruled it out as a possibility, especially as I get older and my T levels start to drop. I've got a lot of crap to think about over the next 10 years. Getting my blood levels tested would be a good start. I really need to do that. I've just been putting it off because, 3 jobs. I don't necessarily have the most flexible schedule when it comes to planning. Anyway, I don't know where I was going with that. Where did that conversation even start? Something about me not wanting to record on Sunday before 6 a.m.? Not that any of that matters by the time you see the show, because it'll be Monday morning, and you know what that means. It's time for another round of the Five Starr Wrestling Report, the wrestling podcast you all need but nobody knows, or whatever the phrase is. I think it's the inverse of that. I don't know at this point. It's not like I'm trying to sell merch. It's the classic WWF review show. The one where I go back and relive the WWF horrors of the 90s. Going through the archives of these retro Raws and dissecting the good, bad, and ugly of the pre-Attitude Era years. 1997 has been, well, it's certainly a crazy year overall. We haven't reached peak crazy yet. It's about to get a whole lot wilder as the year goes on. Last week we covered WrestleMania 13, which was by no means a good WrestleMania pay-per-view, and I still stand by that. You take out that Bret Austin submission match, that show sucked. We talked about how the WWF was doing a lot around this time to try to rekindle fan intrigue, but they still had a lot of catching up to do in terms of making this product a must-see program on a week-by-week basis. By the way, adding that second hour, that has not helped. But with that little precursor out of the way, why don't we dive in and see what this post-WrestleMania show entailed? It's actually the second post-Mania show. And before I attempt to run down what happened on this week's Raw, first we need to backtrack and cover the big story from last week, since we didn't cover last week's Raw. And that whole deal was centered around Bret Hart's heel promo, coming out of the double switch angle from WrestleMania, where Bret went ballistic after the submission match and kept attacking Austin. It's kind of interesting to me because there's a lot that I do remember about the Bret Hart heel run in 1997. It was such a unique psychology arc in the sense that even though Bret was still a heel in the States, like anytime the WWF ran shows in Canada during that year, he was a total babyface. Like these days, it's not really uncommon for babyface and heel dynamics to switch depending on venues or hometowns. You think, I mean, how often is it that we see a top heel in the WWE show up in his hometown and he'll be wildly cheered by everybody, despite any despicable, heinous crap he did previously? We just take it for granted now as fans. But even back in the late 90s, it was a very unusual concept. And out of anything Bret ever did during his run with the Team Canada stuff, I think I explicitly remember this particular promo above anything else. The line that always stuck with me was when he referenced that everybody in the States can kiss his ass. It's like he deliberately was going out of his way to say, from now on, I'm Canada's home hero. Because none of you people in the States respect me. You're all scumbags. It was such a great promo. And of course, then they shot the angle where Shawn had to come out and do the pro-America rah-rah speech and try to make himself the whole babyface in the ordeal. It still sounded phony as fuck coming from Shawn. You know, like all of a sudden I'm supposed to buy that Shawn's the ultimate red, white, and blue patriot. Actually, we'll be talking about the Patriot relatively soon. Not to jump too far ahead. But I just wanted to briefly touch on that since it was a fairly big story they carried over into this week's program. Also, another story that bled into this week, it was everything surrounding the breakup of Owen Hart and Davey Boy. After, 8.5 fucking months? Yeah, they finally did the big breakup angle with Owen and Davey the other week. It apparently happened during their title defense against the Headbangers, which was weird because they still showed up with the belts this week. So I presume that match ended via no decision. Elsewise, I can't explain how Owen and Davey are still the tag team champions, having facilitated that split. So this week, we get Owen versus Davey in a rematch for the European title. The match these two had in the finals for the belt was easily one of the best TV matches I reviewed on a Retro Raw in I don't even know how long. It was so fucking good. So good that I actually went back and watched it a second time after I got through the whole show and finished typing up my notes. Lord knows I didn't have a whole lot of time to begin with. So, going in, my expectations were relatively high. I don't know if I was expecting this to top their first match. Although, to be fair, I also knew how this particular match ended. So the caveat going in is that I knew there wasn't going to be a decisive finish. However, it was still a really good match up until the ref bump angle. It did kind of piss me off seeing them use a pile driver spot as a commercial pitch. I'm not even kidding, that actually happened. Owen gave Davey a spike pile driver, and when they came back, they were just trading blows back and forth like nothing ever happened. Davey getting dropped on his neck apparently had no standing effect. Other than that, and Davey nearly killing Owen with a mistimed back body drop, the rest of the match was fun. Both guys worked hard. Crowd got really into Davey toward the end, which that is important to keep in mind. You know, they've already established that Davey's been the babyface in the whole Owen Bulldog dynamic, even dating back to when he won the European title in the tournament. And so Bulldog's firing back on Owen toward the finish. There's a leapfrog spot where Davey runs underneath Owen and accidentally shoulder blocks Earl Hebner into oblivion. So that led to Owen taking advantage and going out to try to grab a chair from ringside. But before anything else could transpire, out came Bret to put a stop to the whole fight. And again, this is the part that I remember vividly. I will say, and I know this might seem nitpicky. Lord knows I'm the king of trying to poke logic holes in every god-blessed angle in wrestling. But just trying to rationally think through this whole scenario, if Bret was really concerned about Owen and Davey fighting here, if he really didn't want to see these guys beat the shit out of one another, why did he wait almost 15 minutes to come out to try to stop them? Was it the chair that was too far for Bret? So them punching each other and kicking each other in the balls and dropping one another on the rampway, that was all perfectly fine. But no, it was the chair that Bret took an issue with. Got to stop these guys from completely pulverizing one another. That was a tad silly. The promo, however, was really good. You know, like Bret going into the whole tirade about how the American people are responsible for pitting the Hart family against each other for years. How we don't understand what morals and family values are all about because we're constantly fighting with family here in the States. He talked about us making sitcoms out of infighting with relatives. But you see, the Hart family knows all about morals and values. Even when Bret's had his share of issues with Davey and Owen from over the years, he still loves them and respects them enough to not let their issues get in the way of what's more important. And that's their bloodline. And so he eventually hugs the both of them and tells him he needs them to be a part of his life again. He also made Owen cry, which was purely epic because Owen is the worst fake crier in all of humanity. So the condescending nature of it came across so well. I also liked when he went to give everybody the group hug and Bret looked up at the hard cam just to make sure that make sure that everybody knew that he got him. It was good timing. And so they all just left together. Hebner never recovered from the ref bump, so he was presumably dead. There was no finish. Not that that mattered anyway. And after approximately 1 week, after they spent months upon months upon months teasing and teasing and teasing this fucking breakup between Owen Hart and the British Bulldog, well, so much for that. Now they're part of Team Canada with Bret. The promo, I'll admit, did go on for a while. But in order for them to properly get over what they needed to, I think it was important for them to stew on their history and not completely overlook the fact that these guys were feuding at one point. But now Bret's recruited them into his new faction. I guess you could call this the original bloodline before Roman Reigns made it famous. The only difference is these guys are Canadian as opposed to Samoan. But all in all, I had no issues with this. I did take issue with the next match. Mainly in the sense that they booked El Mosco versus Supernova in a cold match that nobody gave a fuck about. And even with Sonny being out there on commentary, still wasn't enough to get me to care. She flirted with the Spanish commentators, talked in Spanish for a bit, flashed her tits on camera. All of that was highly more interesting than watching the Lucha guys do spots, by the way. I think El Mosco won with a sloppy springboard moonsault. Can we all kind of agree that this AAA talent exchange is a complete waste of time and money? Think about it like this. The WWF was getting their asses reamed in the ratings. Just stretched from asshole to appetite. Vince was losing so much money during this time, to the point where people were seriously thinking that he was going to have to sell the company. They were doing that poorly financially. Yet, this is the kind of stuff that he was putting on his program in 1997. All because WCW was doing the same thing with actual recognizable Mexican star power. They were doing Eddie Guerrero versus Rey Mysterio Jr. on Nitro. Meanwhile, these fools were booking El Mosco versus Supernova. Even if you're the most die-hard, loyal AAA fan during this time, who could possibly give a shit? So then we had the Road Warriors out for a promo. JR plugged the upcoming title match on April 20th for the tag belts. Yes, the Road Warriors are getting a tag team title shot against Owen and Davey. It took until halfway through the promo for them to actually mention anything about the match taking place on In Your House. They kept referencing April 20th. They said nothing about it being the pay-per-view. But then they finally mentioned it when they put the graphic up on screen. And so Hawk and Animal did their little spiel. Hawk said they were going to knock the dirty dumplings out of them. No comment. And I know what you're all thinking. So, you recall virtually nothing about that match, correct? The answer is yes. In fact, I'll do you one better. I do not recall a single thing about that In Your House pay-per-view, period. It is branded In Your House 14, The Revenge of Taker. Revenge because apparently he was booked to defend the belt against Mankind because they have previous history together. I do know about the upcoming Fireball angle with Paul Bearer. Did that happen on the pay-per-view? I could have sworn that happened on Raw. Maybe I'm wrong. Who knows? So after that, we had Jesse James in a squash with What's-His-Dick. Jesse came out with a small child. I have no idea who he was or where he came from, but literally all he was there to do was walk to the ring with Road Dogg, and then he took Jesse's hat and left. By the way, they spelled James with 2 M's. So, would that not mean that his name would be pronounced Jesse Jams? All of this is completely futile in the grand scheme of things. So after he won, Honky came into the ring to finally try to recruit Jesse as his protege. The best part was when he mentioned the fact that he's been waiting to make this decision for seemingly months, to which Vince goes, "Well, it has been a while." The equivalent to shit or get off the pot with this dumbass storyline. And so Honky spends like 3 minutes glossing Jesse up, finally gives him his guitar and asks for him to make a decision. And after Jesse put him over and teased that he would join him, he grabbed the guitar and smashed it to pieces. And then he took the mic and said, "It's just a little too out of tune for me." I guess this would be the part where I make the joke about wrestlers breaking guitars and not drawing any money. Of course, that's typically in reference to Jeff Jarrett. At least in this case, Road Dogg didn't break the guitar over Honky's head. I got nothing. It was an angle. We all know what it's leading to, and unfortunately, it's not even the most interesting part in the dynamic between Road Dogg and Billy Gunn. It was the precursor to what eventually began their run together as a tag team. But their actual feud, that sucked. Thank God it didn't last long. On the topic of things that sucked, Crush and Savio Vega wrestled Beavis and Butthead in a tag squash. They announced that Farouk suffered broken ribs and apparently some other injury during the Chicago street fight in Mania. I presume they're referencing the spot where Farouk got yeeted off the top turnbuckle and splatted on the floor. Because that was a great idea for a stupid spot that nobody was going to remember. This match was utterly pointless. They had Shawn on the phone to mention that he'll be on Raw next week to confront Bret after what he did to him. That was arguably the only purpose to the entire segment. An infomercial plug for next week while the nation beat up a pair of job guys. Yay ratings. And so then as we reach the top of hour 2, this is how Vince McMahon opened with his dialogue. Explosion! Contusion! Concussion! What the fuck? What the hell kind of cold opening line is that? Explosion, contusion, concussion. Was he referencing all the symptoms of what it was like to watch this show? It sure was an odd way to lead into the Undertaker Paul Bearer segment. You know, all kidding aside, I will credit the WWF for one thing. They were at least going out of their way around this time to try to show replays of things that happened on other shows, as to not leave everybody completely in the dark. I do appreciate the replay packages of covering what happened on previous episodes. It helps me especially keep track of all the shit happening. Last week they had Paul Bearer try to beg for Taker to take him back as a manager. Just kind of out of the blue with no explanation. I guess the logic being that Taker's now the champion, so Paul's trying to work the sneaky fucker game of getting back into Taker's good graces now that he's the top guy in the pecking order again. Or at least that was how they were trying to lead you astray. And so Paul came out here and, well, I wanted to say did a Paul Bearer promo. That's not entirely accurate. If anything, he was Percy Pringle delivering this promo. He didn't even try to be in character for getting this point across here. I know Paul was about to undergo some major changes with his gimmick, but pretty soon he comes back with a completely new look. I forgot that he apparently changed his vocal tonality too. So he tried to extend the olive branch to Taker one final time, said he needs him back. In fact, I believe his direct quote here was, "Take me back." Like an old married couple begging for a second chance. And so Taker comes out to confront Paul. He says that betrayal is something that he can't forget, but it might be something he can forgive. At which point he gives Paul the WWF title to signify the idea that he accepted his apology. Turns out it was a swerve on Taker's part, because when Paul turns around to showboat the belt to the camera, well, he turns around and gets cold-cocked in the jaw by Taker. And so as Taker's stalking Paul on the floor, grabs the urn from ringside that was on top of the casket, which, by the way, where the hell did the casket come from? There was just a random wooden casket sitting at ringside with no explanation. Who wheeled it out there? It wasn't Paul. Now, on instinct, Wrestling Logic 101 tells you, oh, Mankind's totally going to pop out of the casket when Taker's not looking. Well, Mankind did jump the Undertaker. Except Mankind did not come out of the casket. He came from under the ring. But of course, that was not the main takeaway here. The takeaway was Mankind throwing a fireball in Taker's face to blind him. And they show Paul and Mankind hugging, indicating that the whole thing was a setup from the start. And so that led to Sid eventually running down to chase the heels through the crowd. It was one of the only times in his career where I believe Paul Bearer actually had to run for a shoot. Because boy howdy was Sid hauling ass to go after these guys. It was hysterical. Sid did not give a shit who or what was in his way. He ran from the back all the way down to ringside, chased Mankind and Paul through the crowd. It was an amazing sight. They ran from Sid like they owed him lunch money. Then you also had Taker down to ringside selling the eyes and blindly stumbling around while the officials followed. You know, it's one of those things where the concept of the fireball angle wasn't new around this time. Especially having grown up watching so much territory footage. Like, I had already seen the fireball angle done with the Midnight Express and Ronnie Garvin from '87. So the visual of it wasn't super awe-inspiring like it would have been for anybody that never saw a fireball angle before. But this wasn't even a newfound concept that the WWF was trying out in the late 90s. And they had already done fireball angles before. Sergeant Slaughter used one on Hogan after the WrestleMania 7 match. So it's not like Vince had never used the gimmick in the past. In the context of where they're about to go with the Undertaker-Paul Bearer feud, the Fire is about to become a monumental bit player and everything. Especially when we get to all the stuff with Kane later on in the year. I'm not going to shit on it just because Russo might have shot the idea out during a booking meeting. Although I wouldn't be shocked if that were the case. You know, fine heat angle for building up the title feud for In Your House. It fits the theme of Taker's revenge. So this was all fine. And then we came back for a Sid interview in the locker room. I presume he failed to hunt down Mankind and Paul during his chase. Which, that right there, if you can't manage to outrun Percy fucking Pringle, you've got some bum-ass cardio, dude. Anyway, he vowed that Taker would get his revenge on the heels. I have no earthly clue what the point of this promo was. Nor does it really matter, because Sid's not even around for that much longer. Pretty sure he ends up no-showing a Raw within the next week or two, and he's basically gone after that point. And so that took us to Hunter Hearst Helmsley versus Goldust. Indeed, you heard that right. Triple H versus Goldust. Yet again. Oh, but there's a stip here, you see. The stipulation is that the girls are banned from ringside. Stop right there. Think about how incredibly stupid that sounds. They barred the girls from ringside because they were such a huge, grave threat to the outcome of this match. a 110-pound petite woman that doesn't wrestle, and a bodybuilder woman who has never actually gotten physical with the male talent. And let's be honest, China was big. If this were real, she still would not have been able to beat up Goldust or Triple H in real life. I find that whole thing quite humorous. So we get this match again. I believe it's their 84th encounter in the last 5 months alone. I mean, the match they had in Mania was at least a decent match in comparison to most Hunter Goldust matches we've seen. This was very run-of-the-mill. The announcers were so disinterested in calling the action, they ended up getting into an argument over First Amendment rights at one point. Not to say anything of note happened during the match that required deep thought commentary. I'll let you count Hunter putting Goldust in a chin lock as noteworthy. They did a bunch of spots for a while. Out of their 84 previous matches, 78 of them were more interesting than this. And to the shock of nobody with a functioning pulse, after they established that China was barred from ringside under penalty of risking disqualification, I guess, well, here was their finish. China walks down the aisleway. She gets in the ring. And she kicks Goldust in the ribs for the DQ. Right in plain view of the fucking official. Now, who didn't see that finish coming a mile ahead? Luckily, they made up for that incredibly lame and dumb finish with the man that single-handedly saved the entirety of Hour 2. Pat fucking Patterson. This guy. This part was so awesome. So Hunter's getting into a shoving match with a couple of the officials as they try to break him and China up. And eventually Pat comes in and interjects to try to pry Hunter away. And then after Hunter tried to ruffle him around for a bit, Pat spins him around and starts wailing away on him in the corner. Crowd loses their shit. They pop so hard for Pat Patterson beating the holy hell out of Triple H. And he was not holding back. He was laying his shit in, brother. Probably mouthing to Hunter, cover up. Elsewise, he'd have gotten potatoed. But of course, that opened the door so China could go over and help Hunter out so they could double team poor Pat. And then, we had the brief stare down between Goldust and China before Hunter pulled her out of the ring. Also had Vince McMahon referring to her as a, quote, genetic freak. Stealing Big Papa Pump's gimmick a couple years before that took off. Who knows? Maybe Scotty was watching the WWF in the locker room around this time and said, I can steal that catchphrase. Along with several other great nicknames and gimmick phrases. But yeah, I'm not going to lie. This segment kind of blew. I honestly don't know what there is to say anymore that I haven't already ranted about 100 times with this Triple H Goldust thing. It's gotten to a point where they just keep kicking this dead fucking horse in the sphincter hole over and over again. Like, at some point you have to wonder, Is there legitimately nobody else on the roster for these guys to feud with? Because I was dead sure this feud was over after WrestleMania. It took them 2 weeks before they had to try to run it back again. Still with the fucking babyface not going over. Which is what really infuriates me. Is it any wonder I hated Hunter so much around this time? So that brought us to the second best part of Hour 2, which was the Stone Cold Steve Austin interview with Vince. It's so insane when I look back at the 97 footage with Austin and Vince in the ring together, realizing that this would be the pinnacle and the backbone of the Attitude Era. The Austin McMahon feud in about 12 months' time. Meanwhile, here they were just two guys commingling together. Who'da thunk it? So Austin took a few minutes to run down the fallout from Mania, saying that he never quit and never intended on doing so. The fact that Bret won the match is irrelevant, because he still didn't prove a damn thing when all was said and done. Talked about how when it comes to guys like Bret Hart, all those conversations that Bret came back to the WWF because the people needed a hero, well, that was all a load of crap. Guys like Austin are the see-what-you-get type stars. Whether he's wrestling a bad guy or a good guy, you know that the Austin you see is the real authentic one. And he's not changing for anybody. So he called Bret out to try to settle the score officially, which led to Bret appearing on the big screen to go back and forth with Austin for a bit. The peak of it was when Austin told Bret that their issues won't be over until Austin's looking over his grave with the text that reads, "Here lies Bret Hart, because he just got his pink and black ass kicked by Stone Cold." Which was such an impeccably great quote for a variety of reasons. But the thing that works so well here in this promo is the fact that Austin made it crystal clear. When you see Stone Cold on camera, you know that what you're getting is the real Stone Cold. That he doesn't have to pretend to be a hero because that's not him. He's not a good guy or a bad guy. He's just a redneck from Texas that gets paid to show up, drink beer, and kick ass. Is it any wonder he became so beloved? How many average Americans look at something like that and not think, you know, that sounds pretty freaking cool. I like this Steve fella. He's relatable. He's someone I could hang out with. Just wait until he stuns Vince for the first time. That was the minute Steve won over every blue-collar worker in the country. And so that brought us to our TV main event for the Intercontinental Championship. It is Rocky Maivia defending against Bret Hart. Which immediately got me thinking, damn. Could you imagine if this match happened on Raw a year or two later when they finally dumped this pathetic Rocky Maivia persona, and he had gotten the chance to wrestle Bret as The Rock? Holy shit, that would have been great. And not to say the work here wasn't good, just, again, dude, it was Rocky Maivia in 1997, and the gimmick was absolute death television, and everybody knew it. Everybody except Vince, who kept pushing it. They showed Tony Atlas sitting at ringside. Still no explanation for the no-show at Mania when he was supposedly advertised to come out in Rock's corner. He also paid no factor in anything that happened during this match. He was just on camera watching as a fan. And so Bret beat up Rock through pretty much the whole match. He ended up missing a middle rope elbow drop to allow Rock to make a short comeback. And after a couple near fall spots, he went up to try to give Bret the crossbody attack, which kind of led into a botched near fall spot where Bret tried to stack up Rocky, but didn't really get a good cover on him. And Rocky sort of kicked out at 2.9. To be fair, I don't think anybody actually thought that Bret was going to win the belt here. But they shot the deal where Bret pulled Rocky into the corner and put him in the figure four around the ring post, which led to the DQ. And that's when Austin came out to try to make the save, but the rest of Team Canada tried to beat him down 3-on-1. One thing I didn't mention, totally arbitrary thought here, but I noticed it when Austin wore his street clothes this week. He had on dark jeans and that really famous Austin 316 graphic tee with the bone skull face on the back. Pretty sure I had like 2 or 3 Austin action figures growing up with the same exact gear. They were all duplicates as well. I forget what brand or company they were, but the attire made me remember that. And so, well, the heels got the heat on Austin until the Road Warriors ran down and chased the Canadians through the crowd. And then the show ended with all the babyfaces standing their ground at ringside. All things considered, show wasn't as bad as I probably made a lot of it out to be. Trust me, the go home to WrestleMania was way worse than this. It is sort of that post-Mania slog where they got a lot of time to fill between now and SummerSlam. A lot of the early summer periods are considered downtimes for the product, even though we're not quite at the summer period yet. But it's like I mentioned about the In Your House thing earlier. That pay-per-view I have absolutely no recollection of. And that includes the WWF title match between Taker and Mankind. They have started the early build to Bret versus Shawn for Montreal in November. But Shawn's still a while out before he's healthy to get physical in a major capacity again. So the stuff they're doing with Bret and Team Canada right now, it's all mainly designed to drum up as much heat as possible before they reintroduce Shawn into the picture full time. And then there's Austin, which I think they're trying to still figure out where he fits into all this madness. I am trying to remember how they end up getting to Austin versus Owen at SummerSlam. Now that I'm seeing how these puzzle pieces are all coming together again. It obviously stems around the stuff they're doing with him and Team Canada. But that match was also for the Intercontinental title, if I remember right. So between now and SummerSlam, Owen ends up beating The Rock to win the IC belt. I have no idea when or how that happened. Was that on pay-per-view, or did they give away that title switch on Raw? Way too much detail for my brain to keep track of. Going back and trying to recall all these details on a month-by-month basis. Especially during a time when I was so honed in on what was happening on WCW. WWF was the piss break or channel surfing product for me during this time. At least when things were live. But there you have it. Not a horrible show, but it is still rough getting through 2 hours of this product. Tell you that much. But that'll be it for now. And we will be back this coming Friday. Why did I end that with a question mark? Oh, I remember. It's because I'm trying to process when in the hell I'm actually going to sit down to record anything. No, I have confirmed. There will be a Friday show next week. I'm going to make it work. I might be up a little late doing the editing, but I want to make sure I get it done. So, plan for a Friday podcast. We'll cover WCW and Mid-South like we always do. But thanks everybody for checking out the show this week. And happy belated Palm Sunday and a big Easter week ahead. If that's something that you celebrate, I don't know. But I'll talk to you all soon. Thanks everybody and take care. Peace out.